Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm very excited to have this guest on today. His name is David Reed, and he wrote the book Face of a Nephite, DNA Studies, and the Book of Mormon. And part of the reason he wanted to come on the show today was I had both Simon Southerton and Thomas Murphy come on my program, and they actually wrote a paper, which I'll leave a link to, where they discuss part of the paper discusses this article that you wrote, this booklet or paper, if you want to call it, about your finding in your hypothesis is that the Kennewick man that was discovered in the 90s in the Pacific Northwest, you believe may be very well date to the time of the Nephites and think that this is a Nephite. And that's a very interesting and a very controversial position to take, obviously. And I find it to be an interesting thing. Before we get to that, though, I kind of want to just have you kind of introduce yourself, give a little bit of your background, and maybe what caused you to maybe decide to write this paper.
Okay, sure. So I am a patent attorney, a lawyer. In terms of background before that, I have a bachelor's in chemistry. The way I got interested in this is through the work Rod Meldrum had done. So back in that 2008 to 2010 timeframe, when he was talking about DNA in the Book of Mormon and the mitochondrial haplogroup X, that may be from the Middle East, it was something that I became aware of. My mother was actually who pointed me to it. And when I started to look at that, I was interested in figuring out for myself, what does the evidence really show? And so I started to do research on my own on the DNA evidence. And as I researched it, getting into the sort of 2014 to 2015 timeframe, I started to find additional DNA evidence as well, particularly on the patrilineal side, the Y chromosome DNA, which I felt corroborated the mitochondrial haplogroup X DNA and was pointing towards a secondary additional non-Asian ancestry for Native Americans. So I started to research that, and then I ended up doing a couple of presentations with the Book of Mormon Evidence, that Firm Foundation conference in that sort of 2015 timeframe. That was right after the church had come out with its DNA studies in the Book of Mormon article, and then that triggered further research. I never intended to write anything. The only reason I haven't written anything before. The only reason I wrote this was because nobody else was writing or presenting it. I felt it was information that would be useful. And in that research, obviously, I came across Kennewick man. I started to realize that the understanding for Kennewick man is that he was 9,000 years old. But when I did the research, I came across that there had been carbon date testing for him. Some of it fit the Book of Mormon time frame, started to look into that more. And anyway, that's how the book ended up coming about. I wrote it because I felt there was information that needed to get out there and nobody else was really doing it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I remember in the 90s when this discovery was made, and a lot of people had made a big to-do about this, possibly even having this individual having Caucasoid features, and that it would not be related to any current groups that were Native Americans. This was like a separate thing, and it caught a lot of headlines, a lot of interest from people about perhaps there was another group of people that were unrelated to some of the Native Americans. When you first heard about the Kennewick man story, did you think at the time that those dates were accurate, or did you even think at the time that perhaps that could have possibly been a Nephite even then?
Oh no, it wasn't something that occurred to me. So I had assumed that Kennewick man was, I knew just about the same that you did, that ancient Native American. I had seen, the recreation of him, based off the skeleton, kind of looks like Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, the actor, right? And so I didn't really have any interest in Kennewick man until, like I said, in sort of that 2014-ish time frame, when I found out that he tested as mitochondrial DNA haplogroup X, which is that
Okay.
Middle Eastern origin DNA type. And then that's what then triggered
Okay.
my looking into him. And I had no idea about the carbon dates until I researched into it. And then I found out that there had been additional carbon date testing that had been tossed out that actually fit the Book of Mormon timeframe.
So there were three things you brought up to me that you felt were misrepresented. Your work was being misrepresented in my conversation, as well as in the paper itself, co-authored by my two guests, Simon Southerton and Thomas Murphy. Let's actually start with the carbon dating. Why do you feel they misrepresented your work, and maybe you can come on and defend what you're trying to say, that you think that, yeah, no, actually I do have some citations here that I can offer that can date it to a Book of Mormon time period.
Yeah, so I mean, this is primarily what Simon Southerton had said, and he said this when he went on with John DeLynn, as well as on your show. What he said was that the carbon dates that I relied on were not even for Kennewick Man, that they were carbon dating of sediments around Kennewick Man, that I was confused or mischaracterizing and saying that they were for Kennewick Man, and that's not true. He points to a letter that Dr. Jim Chatters sent to me, where Jim Chatters says that, essentially says that, and then Simon Southerton says, I misrepresented because in the book I don't talk about that. Well, that's actually not true either. So what happened was Simon Southerton had seen a pre-publication a copy of the paper, which my publisher had sent out to various people for comment and feedback. And in that process, I had also sent a copy of it to Jim Chatters. He's a relatively famous scientist. He was the one that was the first examination of the Kennewick Man bones. I gave him the copy of the paper, asked for his feedback. He gave me feedback in the emails, and Simon Southerton points to those emails in his presentation with John DeLynn and with you. But in those, he points to those emails where Jim Chatters said that the carbon dating was for the sediments around Kennewick Man and not for Kennewick Man himself. So, but what Simon doesn't say is that I've addressed that already in the book and explained that Dr. Chatters, while a well-known scientist, he was actually wrong on that. So Dr. Chatters, even though he worked with the bones, he did not do the carbon date testing. That was done by a man named Stafford and others. And in the paper by Stafford and others, they very clearly state that they state all of the carbon date testing and the results, and they very clearly show the carbon date test that I rely on as being for Kennewick Man. So this Kennewick Man is, and Simon Southerton has referred to it, it's a compilation of scientific articles and studies on Kennewick Man. And specifically, it's on pages 68 and 69 of the book, table 3.5, that if anybody looks at, it very clearly states that the carbon date testing on the carbonates was extracted by crushing bone. So it's from Kennewick Man's bone. It's extracting carbonate from material from the bone, and that's clearly also been described in the tables with the dates and described as the carbon dates for Kennewick. So Dr. Chatters was simply incorrect. I mean, he was not the one that did the carbon dates. He misunderstood. I addressed that in the book already. So that's the first thing, and that's okay. The most important thing is that, and anybody can go and check the citations themselves. There were 20 carbon date results that came back for Kennewick Man. 5 of them fit the Book of Mormon time frame.
Okay, so that's what you're saying, is that there was carbon dates that were extracted from the bones, not from the surface area or surrounding, that date to Book of Mormon times. That's what you're saying in your paper, and that's what you wanted to clarify, that there are some dates that do correspond. That's basically
yes. Now, I should clarify that some of the carbon dates that came in the Book of Mormon time from the bone, they did. So there were 5 dates. There were some that were from the bone material, and there's some that were sediments that were attached to the bone material, but were felt to represent the date for Kennewick Man. All 5 were for testing the date for Kennewick Man.
Okay. So interesting.
Yeah,
All right.
and then in my book, I go into okay, so you have these two groups of dates that came out, the 9,000 years old date versus the, sort of that 2,200 to 2,600 years ago date, which is correct. And then I talk about the burial circumstances, how the location where he was buried and the sediments around him showed significant artificial aging, and so if that's the case, it points to the earlier dates as being the more reliable. So that's the argument I make.
Okay. Well, now I'm not an expert at all about carbon-14 dating and bones or anything like that. So my main thing is just to let you come on here, and you felt like your work was being misrepresented. So you wanted to clear the air to let them know that, no, I do have some citations here. I do have some evidence that I bring to the table that was not maybe addressed or was ignored or whatever, misrepresented. That's how you feel. And so I wanted you to be able to clear the air and give you this platform so that you could give your position. Was there anything else about the carbon dating that you wanted to address?
Yeah, that I think it's, I think just about any intelligent individual that's willing to research and look at it, if they read that part of my book, I think that they'll understand it. I don't think it's beyond the ability to understand. The principles are there pretty clearly. I cite to the peer-reviewed articles, and where I differ from them, I make clear where I'm differing and why. I think it's pretty accessible, and I think that it's a legitimate argument. So, and I expressly acknowledge that it's something where a person could go either way in terms of what the evidence shows on it, but I feel like the weight of the evidence actually supports the dates consistent with the Book of Mormon.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're able to talk about that, because you felt that was important. Now, I want to move on to another area that you wanted to address. And actually, it's interesting. I first engaged you when you were giving a presentation last year to the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. That's the first time we got to know each other. And I remember watching your presentation, and I specifically asked you the question. I don't know if you remember it, but I specifically asked you, okay, is this model that you're describing, does this assume a young earth creationism as being part of your, because as I was hearing the presentation, I was hearing what I thought would have been young earth creationist arguments. Okay. That's what I was hearing. So I wanted you to clear the air on that you actually say, no, it does not require, nor does it assume a young earth creation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And I think that your assumption would be fairly typical, and that's because, as you know, with the Heartland DNA work, the Rod Meldrum work, it brings in it a young Earth creation, model that they focus on a lot. Okay, and that's actually part of the reason that I wrote the book, is that I think that there are a lot of people that reject and won't listen to the haplogroup X, that Book of Mormon DNA evidence, because they assume that it requires a young Earth creation model, and Rod fully adopts a young Earth creation model. So what I wanted to write something that, as I said, I went and I looked at what does the evidence really show, and when I came away from that, what I felt that is that the peer-reviewed scientific literature actually is consistent with the Book of Mormon as well. And so I put in this, the face of the Nephite, it doesn't assume one way or the other, whether a young Earth creation or a theory of evolution. And what I put into, I write to both audiences. And I say that resolution and looking at the DNA evidence doesn't actually require one way or the other. Now, a young Earth creationist, it'll be easier to accept the DNA evidence for the Book of Mormon, but I also make arguments for those that don't accept a young Earth creation model. And then part of that is explanations of that even if you accept the theory of evolution, you still can't reliably rely on the molecular clock for the dating of when the haplogroup X and these other DNA types came into the Americas. And the reason being, I don't know if you remember from the book, but I give a whole example with rolling a die, that there haven't been enough random mutations that have occurred so far to reliably say, okay, this is how long ago it happened.
Okay, so you're saying I can accept a view of biological evolution, that the earth is quite old, but also you're saying your arguments can also be made to them. Perhaps you're saying that because you're even writing to two audiences, that perhaps is that there's inferring then that you're coming from a young earth creationist position. You're just trying to say that you believe that you think that based on the scientific evidence that you present in your paper and that you cite, is that an argument can be made, whether you believe in even the Book of Mormon or not, that the argument could be made that these remains of the Kennewick man date to a much later period than what some of the other dates are. And you also say that there was things that happened in the soil that caused artificial aging. So you're saying that you're not necessarily trying to make the Kennewick man fit within the pages of the Book of Mormon. You're just saying that based on the evidence that you're presenting in your paper, is that no, an argument can be made for using modern scientific tools and understanding that I can make the argument that this is actually a much later, that this happened much closer to our period of time than what a lot of the others think. Is that a fair assessment there of how you want your book to be read?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And as for me personally, I am a creationist in the sense that I believe that God created the world. So I do believe in the scriptures. In terms of the timeline, I don't know what the timeline was, but for the books, that purpose, it's really not about me. So I'm a lawyer. When I was a young lawyer, I remember working for a senior lawyer, and he wanted, there was a case and he wanted information on the law. I wrote him a memo on what the law said. I said, this is what the law says. And it says what the law is. And his statement to me was essentially that, where are the direct quotes? I don't care what you say the law is. I want to see the direct quotes, right? I want to see for myself and I understand that because anytime you have someone step in and sort of filter or paraphrase the information, then then that brings in a filter that brings in doubt. So for me, as from the book, as you'll see, it's a lot of direct quotes. It's relying on the citations and the direct quotes. I'm kind of irrelevant in terms of, I never asked the reader to sort of trust me on this is what it says. For all of it, I have it transparent and open. You can go and look at the site. You can go and look at the data yourself, and you can go and you can make your own conclusion on it.
Okay.
And I feel like I have done that. So even with whether it's a young Earth creation model or the full theory of evolution model, the citations are there, which I believe show that there is DNA evidence that is consistent with the scientific literature and does support the Book of Mormon.
Okay. And you're a believer in the Book of Mormon. You believe it's literal history. So you're bringing that to the table, but that shouldn't necessarily disqualify you from writing this paper because you have personal beliefs. You're just trying to say, let me just present to you some other evidence that maybe contradicts the dominant narrative, but this evidence also needs to be taken into account. And that's what you're doing with this paper.
Exactly. And I try to take myself out of it. Like I said, I mean, my personal beliefs are actually irrelevant because it's not what I say. I'm never asking anybody to trust me. I'm putting all of the citations there, all the direct quotes. You can go and look at it yourself. You can look at the data yourself. If you'll do the work, you can see it for yourself.
So this is the other thing that you wanted to address. And of course, this is the very touchy subject, especially in today's world. Actually, it's been an ongoing problem for this country from the very beginning. And that is the idea of the racism that they talk about, that it's racist to assume that this is not, to say that this is maybe a Caucasian, that you're bringing to the table a lot of things that are racist. And you wanted to clear the air on the whole racism issue as well. Perhaps you could address that today.
Yeah, I have to say I don't really like the racism discussion because it's so toxic and so divisive and fans of flames of division. But so as you said, they kind of indicate or say that I'm racist, but I have to sort of take a step back because nobody cares who I am or it's not about me, right?
Right.
They're only saying that about me to say it about the book. And I'm not racist. I believe that just like it says in the Book of Mormon, it's 2 Nephi 26:33, all are alike unto God. So I believe that firmly. But really what the argument is they're arguing that the Book of Mormon is traditionally interpreted as racist, and that's really what the argument and critique is there. And my response on that is that I don't feel like I'm somebody that is in a position to second guess what God did. And my view of the Book of Mormon is the same as someone like you might view the Bible and the Old Testament, right? That the Old Testament is full of indications that God chose Israel as his covenant people, that they were his favored people, that he favored the nation of Israel. And I think it would be very easy to, in the same manner, say, hey, that's saying that is racist. But if you're a believer in the book, then it's just accepting what God chose to do and not to impose or second guess my view of it. And the Book of Mormon's the same way. The people that came out of the Book of Mormon were Old Testament people, and they were God's covenant people. And so for me, it's not about race. It's about, I don't care about the race. I only care about the Book of Mormon and whether it's true or not. And so the Book of Mormon says that those people were of the house of Israel. And so what's happened is those that have attacked the Book of Mormon and said, well, wait a second, Native Americans, they weren't Middle Eastern. Native Americans all came from Eastern Asia. It's all Eastern Asian ancestry. And so the book has been to show that that's not entirely true, that there's a lot of Asian ancestry, but there's also indications of a Middle Eastern ancestry, a partial Middle Eastern ancestry for Native Americans, and a part non-Asian ancestry. And that's shown with the haplogroup X, but not just that, but on the Y DNA side, the patrilineal DNA side too, with, and I go into that more in the book, that there's a significant number of Native Americans who have patrilineal DNA, which is non-Asian in ancestry too. So for me, it's not about race. It's just about disproving that attack on the Book of Mormon, that all Native Americans have an Eastern Asian ancestry. They bring up the ancestry race, so it's just a response to that to show that actually it's not true.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask you too. One of the criticisms that they talked about in my interview was that they felt you misrepresented using this particular model as an earlier version, that you didn't show the final model of the that they put. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So in the book, I show all of the models, right?
Okay.
And so it's on page 44 of the book. I do show all of the models. Okay. And the model that I show for the front, I picked because I feel like that is the most objective and accurate. So, and I'll just point out too, so with Thomas Murphy and Simon Southerton's article that they wrote, if you read that Journal of Northwest Anthropology article they wrote, you'll note they admit in there that when you do one of these kinds of recreations, the most subjective, least objective part is the hair color, eye color, skin color. So in presenting him without hair color, eye color, and skin color, what I was doing is taking out the subjective, least objective parts. So the two choices, once you take that out, is either this one or the one that looks like Jean-Luc Picard. And I chose this one. This one was done by the Smithsonian. Again, these are, non-members. The other potential one could have been the one that sort of looks like Jean-Luc Picard. Either one is okay. I actually asked permission from both places. I asked permission from the Smithsonian to use this one, and I asked permission from Dr. Chatters to use the one that looks like Jean-Luc Picard. And I ended up, I appreciate both of them, Dr. Chatters and the Smithsonian both said that it was fine to use it for the cover. And so then it was just a choice of those two. And of the two, I like this one better. But either one comes out as white in that sense, in the sense that the coloring was removed. So we don't know what his skin color actually was, but we know that to put a skin color on there is subjective.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that. I find this to be an interesting conversation because, I remember when all this was in the news, and then I remember reading Terrell Gibbons' take on it when he talked about it, By the Hand of Mormon, which I thought was interesting. Right. And I one of the things, you actually reached out to me shortly after the interview was aired, and you had said that you'd like to come on and to respond, and I was more than happy to have you come on and talk. And we also entertained the idea of possibly setting something up where we could do a panel where Simon and Thomas could be on it, and we could have a conversation about it. You said you would be open to doing something like that, so you just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I am open to doing something like that. I personally feel like if it's on sort of the science and clarifying, I'm happy for that kind of conversation, especially if it's a open and fair, neutral, not confrontational. And I think it can be. I'm not a confrontational person. Like I said, I don't take things personally. I understand that when they attack me, it's really about the Book of Mormon, not about me. They don't care about me. I'm not that interested in the discussion on racism too much, because I kind of feel like the topic of racism is overdone. I think it's divisive, more harmful than helpful overall. And I'm not an expert on racism, and I'm not that interested in a racism conversation. But if it's about the science, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Well, David, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today. Do you feel like you're able to give your position and be able to clearly delineate it, and let the audience then be able to kind of look into this, read your paper, read the other paper, and make up their own minds? Do you feel like you were fairly represented today?
I do, and I appreciate you letting me do that. I'm hopefully you'll let me put a link to the book down below if anybody is interested in doing that. And I do appreciate what you've done, because I think it's a valuable thing to hear different voices and allow them to present themselves in a good way. So I'm appreciative of what you've done there, Stephen. Well,
thank you, David, and I appreciate you for coming on and giving your position and everything like that, and sharing with the audience. Like I said, this is an important place. This channel has been described as the Switzerland of Mormonism. It is a safe space. It is a place where all different views are given a fair hearing. And so, yeah, I think that's great. You were able to come on today and make the time.
I'm please. Sorry.
Yeah,
I forgot. There was one other thing that I wanted to respond to.
Please do.
It was kind of with the carbon dating, but not quite. Okay. So in Thomas Murphy and Simon Southerton's article, and it's also been said elsewhere, it points to a journal article by individuals named Raff and Bolnick, Raff, R-A-F-F, Bolnick, B-O-L-N-I-C-K, Raff and Bolnick. And it says that Raff and Bolnick have already addressed and, rejected and shown that the mitochondrial DNA haplogroup X evidence doesn't tie to the Middle East. And I just wanted to say that that's also incorrect. Raff and Bolnick was a 2015 article. I addressed that in my book. And two things that they relied on: one was the Kennewick man dating, which of course we've already talked about. And then the other thing Raff and Bolnick relied on was they said that the haplogroup X DNA, which is found in Native Americans, is different than the mitochondrial X DNA that's found in the Middle East. But what they don't mention on that is that even though it's not exactly the same, the key question is, the haplogroup X DNA in the Americas had to come from somewhere in the old world. Where did it come from? And the answer is that the closest and widest variety of the haplogroup X is in the Middle East. And I have in my book that the peer-reviewed literature, others have said that it's clear that the haplogroup X did come from the Middle East. So anyway, I just wanted to address that. Some people say that Raff and Bolnick have already rejected this, but actually Raff and Bolnick was before my book, and my book addresses that. So thanks. I forgot I wanted to add that.
Oh, sure. And about while we're at it too, is have you heard any positive feedback from non-members that have read your paper that maybe think there's some validity to your arguments?
Okay, so that's a good question. I would say yes.
Okay.
I would, some, I'm not sure whether they were members or not. So when I was preparing the book, as you know, a pre-publication version was sent out to Simon Southerton and to Dr. Chatters, that both non-members, both don't agree with the conclusions that I reached. But at that same time, I had it go out, both my publisher and I sent it out to a number of other people as well for comments and feedback, and I took that back and put that in. It was mostly from members, some people that Boyd Tuttle knew as well. Jonathan Neville was another example of someone who read a part of it and gave some comments. But I would say that there hasn't been a lot of interest outside of church members in reading it. So that would be a good question for you. I mean, in reading it, what do you think? In my opinion, I think it's pretty, as I said, I take myself out of it. I think the evidence is really there. I think people can go and look and address the evidence directly without being about me.
Well, that's the key thing. It's that you just want to present the evidence and let the people decide, present the facts. Perhaps I try to take an agnostic position whenever I can on things. But I do think it's just interesting to hear your perspective and where you're coming from, what you're bringing to the table. And I want to thank you so much for doing that today. So you've been able to get everything out. That's the important thing. You're able to touch every base you needed to, which is great. I want to thank you so much, David, for coming on the program today.
All right, thank you.
So, folks, I just want to remind you that don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and the notification bell to be informed when the new episode comes out. There are going to be links in the descriptions for some of the stuff we talked about today, as well as there are links in there to financially support the channel, whether it's on PayPal, whether it's on Patreon, or whether it's the merch store, MormonBookReviews.com. So I just wanted to, I also want to remind you, we are doing the ongoing book giveaway contest. So make sure you put your name in the subject heading for the book drawing. There's a link in there, and go from there. So either way, I just remind my folks, the most important thing is all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.